Thanks, Moira. That is a hard act to follow. So, I'm Associate Professor Cassandra Star. I lead the Climate and Sustainability Policy Research Group at Flinders. And Mick asked me to come and talk today. I'm talking about, funnily enough, climate action, something that's very close to my heart. And it took me a while to think about what I was going to talk to you about this afternoon. And I've been feeling in a very reflective mood the last week or two. So it got me thinking about where I've been and where I'm going. And unfortunately for Mick, that meant I finished my slides this morning, not when I was required to. So sorry about that, Mick. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a story. Once upon a time, I was a very naive 18-year-old. And it was at a time when the future, very far off in the future, problem of climate change was first becoming of public interest. And being a very naive 18-year-old, I thought, surely there must be a solution, a simple solution, a technical solution, one that I could help find, one that might be found in a chemistry lab, an atmospheric chemistry lab. And so, as a young, naive 18-year-old, I thought maybe this is what my future looked like. And off I went to university to study science and chemistry. But I did then discover in a class in third year that I was made to do, that I didn't want to do, about environmental policy, had this moment. And the moment was, it did not matter what I found as a scientist. It did not matter what I found as a chemist, because then I had to convince people to do something about it. So the problem was not going to be an easy technical fix. It was going to be something complex, something long, and something that involved lots of people, including ones just like you. So that caused me to do a little bit of rethinking and a bit more study, away from science and closer to politics and public policy. And I thought, surely then, if this is a really important problem, if it's going to have significant impacts for the world, then the governments of the world would cooperate and come up with a solution to protect their citizens, to look after all of us. Well, we're in the week where COP27, so 27 years since the first international negotiations, is happening in Egypt. Things are not going that well, if you've been following the coverage of COP27. We have seen progress over time. We can't say we haven't, but we're not yet at a place where the negotiations our governments have done will guarantee us a safe climate future. Sticking points in current negotiations this week include countries not wanting to outlaw subsidisation of fossil fuels. Unfortunately, I am looking at our Prime Minister as I say that. But also, there's no agreement about a mechanism for loss and damage from climate change for poorer countries than us. So, a PhD in international relations did not get me to a place of solving climate change. And if we look at the progress that has been made so far, Australia, yes, I am looking at you. We are in a place where if all countries of the world undertook the kinds of policies that we have, we're looking at a future of more than 3 degrees in temperature rise. So, after that very disappointing revelation about the PhD, oops, sorry, I went one too far there. I thought surely pressure on domestic national governments would be a way of driving change. If we can't get them to all move together, we can pick them off one by one in a national context. Surely they will be moved by pressure from their citizens, by pressure from parts of the business community and industry to make this kind of change. And yes, we have seen some governments move significantly and in short periods of time. Not here, other places. A number of European nations in particular have made significant progress, but others have not. We're one of them. There's a whole range of reasons why. I've written a book about that. But a couple of dot points for the Australian context. There's no bipartisanship here. The two sides of politics do not agree about climate change. There is a very particular view about Australia's place in the global economy that is shared by both parties. In some of the academic literature, this has been called the quarry view of the Australian economy, that we're a place where you dig stuff up, that we don't have anything else. There's the influence of elite and powerful voices in this debate. And our politicians then are quite frightened of the divisions that they think exist in the public about climate change. Great example from this week. 3 days ago, our good friend Barnaby was on Sunrise and said that we had solved climate change because it was raining wherever he was, which I think was Armidale. So I was glad to hear that and decided to give up my career and go into floristry. So if we cannot count on national governments to fix this problem, is it the business community that is the driver of change? Here in South Australia, we have certainly seen elements of this. We've been very fortunate with our renewable energy revolution. But is that on its own enough? Because we haven't stopped climate change. And scientifically, we're at a point where we're not going to. What we're going to do is learn how to adapt and stop enough for us to have a safe climate future. But to do that, we need some solutions. And this is a really complex problem. It is one that needs solutions from more than one space. It needs solutions that are going to be different for different constituencies. And it also needs us to think about how we secure those solutions and how we bring along all of the communities with us in a really quick time frame. So from the research that I've done with my team, I thought about this quite a lot and thought about what are the key principles that I would draw from all of the different sorts of projects that we've done. And these are the three that I came up with. And I think in lots of ways, the first one is the most important. When we look at communities who disagree with or who are worried about the kinds of change we're talking about, they're not doing it because they're clinging to the joy of life as a coal miner. That's not what concerns them. What concerns them is their economic future, how they will feed their family, and what their community will look like when the coal mine goes away. So what we need to be selling to people is a vision of a good life, that what we think is a good life and what we want to give them is the same thing that they want. It's not about we want to give you this kind of energy rather than this kind, or this kind of job rather than that kind. It's about them wanting a good life. So that's the big thing. But the other two are how we go about making decisions and how we build something that helps people adapt. So decisions should be guided by climate justice. So we should be thinking about that when we're making choices. And that we should also be building stronger communities and better well-being to take advantage of a safe climate future. So when I talk about climate justice, what I mean is a particular way of understanding how we got where we are, who will be burdened in the future disproportionately, and what we should do about that, who should pay. And we know from every report pretty much, so from the United Nations reports, from a lot of the academic literature, that there are communities that will feel the impacts of climate change much more than we will. So that will include small island nations. It will include many countries in our region that are a lot poorer than we are. It will include people who live in coastal areas, coastal communities. Women and children will be disproportionately impacted, not to mention ecosystems and a range of species that will probably not survive significant temperature increases. So when we're thinking about our solutions, we need to be thinking about how do we protect those groups? How do we make sure that the burden or the impact on them is not disproportionate? And when we look at the ways that people talk about climate justice, climate movements in particular, they have different national understandings of this. So if you look at the United States and Canada, for example, when they are talking about climate justice, they have a real focus on the disproportionate impacts on First Nations people and on people of colour, where environmental bads have largely been located in the past. If we look at the UK, there's been a real focus on things like energy poverty. And given the cold of their winters, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a debate that is really starting to rev up again in the UK, given the cost of energy and the Ukraine war as they move into winter. Here in Australia, though, earlier in the evolution of the climate movement, we had a lot of focus on our responsibility to our Pacific neighbours, and that makes a lot of sense. But then we had this very dark period in Australian politics, children overboard, the demonising of refugees, where that's really become an idea that can't be talked about. So the focus has really shifted onto communities where fossil fuels have supported them. So coal mining in the Hunter Valley, for example. So climate justice is a way to help us think through those solutions and the choices that we need to make. But how do we bring communities along with us when we're trying to do that? And from our research, there are two things that really stand out. A focus on just transition, so the idea that we help communities transition in a way that is just. So think about the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. There are people working in the coal mines there whose father was a coal miner, whose grandfather was a coal miner. They're not in love with the idea of being a coal miner, but it is a crucial part of their community. If it's to go away, what do we give them instead? How do we help them make that change? And that's what the focus of Just Transition is all about. But the other big one is climate resilience. And we've heard a lot about climate resilience in the last couple of years, particularly around the idea that we can help communities help themselves. And I do like that idea on the face of it, but I don't like it as an idea if it means we're just going to hang communities out to dry. If we're going to have real climate resilience in our communities, it needs to be inclusive. One of the things that really hit me hard with the Lismore floods was watching on Twitter people tweeting out asking for help for people with disabilities who were stuck in their homes as the water rose. We need to have things going on in those communities which make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen. So if we are going to talk about climate resilience, it needs to include everyone. It needs to include vulnerable communities, marginalised communities in those solutions. So how do we do it? From the research that we've done, these are the 5 things that I would say we really focus on. The first one is, if we want a transition that allows us to have a safe climate future, nobody gets left behind. So that means if we are going to have a technologically driven transition, how are we putting those technologies in the hands of everybody in the community? So if we're talking about rooftop solar, if you're a renter, has your landlord bought you rooftop solar? So we need better solutions than that. We need to make sure everyone has access. And the vulnerable and marginalised go first, because the burdens will be on them first. And you have to co-design solutions with communities. And there are a couple of reasons that we do that. One is you actually then are able to prioritise things that are most needed and most important, but it also means that they're going on the journey with you. You're helping them drink the Kool-Aid as you're helping them. And then you get to embed those solutions really easily into their context because they've told you what works for them. And the other big one that I think we don't talk about very much is the need for trauma-informed approaches. I did some work for the legal industry, looking at how they rolled out services after the fires in Kangaroo Island. And one of the big things that came out was, when you're working with communities that have been impacted by something like this or another kind of disaster, they are traumatised. You know, they would have people come into the community centre who, in the first 6 months after the fire, couldn't even really form the idea or the questions or the requests that they had. A year and a half later, they still had people coming in who had not yet talked to the legal services about their problems with insurance companies because they couldn't face it. They were so deeply traumatised. And we're going to see that over and over again. And we see people also talking about climate grief. So these sorts of trauma-informed approaches are really critical to success here. So that's how we do it. But the reminder that I would give you before Mick comes and stands next to me on the stage is why we do it. And it's because we don't have a choice but to do it. Thank you.